The recall of Parliament before the Civil War restarts the hate-hate relationship of the 1620s. This relationship was to degenerate, and on the 4th of January 1642, King Charles I, with 300 soldiers, entered the House of Commons to arrest 5 members of Parliament for high treason. The MPs were Mr Hollis, Mr Pym, Sir Arthur Hasselrig, Mr Hamden and Mr William Strode. The record of the day states, His Majesty came onto the House and took Mr Speaker's chair, saying, Gentlemen, I am sorry to have this occasion to come on to you. The 5 members had already fled. Speaker Lenthal did not give any information about them, instead replying to the King's questions as follows. May it please your Majesty, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak in this place, but as this House is pleased to direct me, whose servant I am here, and humbly beg your Majesty's pardon, that I cannot give any other answer than this is to what your Majesty is pleased to demand of me. Speaker Lenthal therefore defied the King to uphold the privileges of Parliament. The King had to leave without arresting the 5 MPs. The King shortly afterwards left London. The next time he returned was for his trial and execution. No monarch has entered the House of Commons since then. Over the last few lectures, I have spoken about the long-term causes of conflict and the attempts by Charles to rule without Parliament. However, we are now to look at the events which lead up to the Civil War in 1642. Our intention, therefore, is to be able to suggest reasons for the start of the Civil War and reach a judgment on the cause of it in 1642. Following this lecture and the completion of the associated material, you will, knowledge-wise, be able to explain the backgrounds to Laud and Wentworth and why they were such a huge influence on the King. Skills-wise, you will be able to analyse the material around the Irish Rebellion and the impact this has on the start of conflict in 1642. And then finally, behaviours, you will begin to interpret the information on the start of conflict and apply to your analysis. The Long Parliament met in November 1640, and the first action was for it to focus on those it considered responsible for the King's acts in the 1630s. These evil councillors were impeached, and Thomas Wentworth, the Earl of Strafford, and William Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury, were arrested. Pym's junto was a group which organised the opposition strategy to the King in the Long Parliament. Led by John Pym, John Hamden and Arthur Hasselrig, Pym was the figurehead due to his training as a lawyer and his meticulous work in recording Charles's illegal actions in the 1630s. This made him an ideal leader for the opposition. Before the trial of Wentworth, Parliament passes a Triennial Act. This meant Parliament must be called once every 3 years, therefore ensuring the King was not to have another personal rule. By April, it became clear to Pym that any trial of Wentworth was unlikely to find support in the House of Lords. Pym arranged for the use of an Act of Attainder, an act that declared an individual a traitor and disinherited their family. To secure the passage of the Act, Pym revealed a plot by the Catholic army officers to release Strafford and dissolve Parliament. The first army plot caused an angry mob to surround Parliament until the Act was passed. Charles signed the Act, encouraged by Wentworth, and lived to regret this moment until his own death. Charles was also made to sign an Act that ensured Parliament could not be dissolved without his own consent. Wentworth's execution in May 1641 was well attended on Tower Hill. However, some believed Pym had gone too far, and his belief was strengthened when, led by Pym, Parliament excluded bishops from the House of Lords. Charles also agreed to the official establishment of Presbyterianism in Scotland. The power of the King was further undermined by the abolition of prerogative courts and the King's ability to collect ship money. Parliament then went on to request the King sign the 10 propositions, a petition to the King from Parliament, organised by Pym, which had 10 points. The most important points are as follows: that Charles should delay his visit to Scotland. Many worried, after the army plot, that Charles would try to deploy the Scottish armies against Parliament. Secondly, that Charles should remove the Catholic priests from the Queen's service. There was a great fear that Catholicism would enter England through the back door if the Catholic priests who surrounded the Queen converted the royal sons into Catholics. the dismissal of advisers who Parliament disapproved of and who they blamed for stirring up divisions between the king and his people. This was a key and major issue. Parliament was reluctant to ever challenge the king directly. Instead, it always challenged his advisers, key examples being Strafford and Buckingham. Finally, the appointment of such officers and councillors as his people and Parliament may have just cause to confide in. By the 26th of June, both the Commons and Lords have agreed that the 10 propositions should be the basis for negotiations with the king. However, Charles rejected it outright because the idea that a monarch could not be able to choose his or her own advisers was without precedent. Therefore, he left for Scotland. The execution of Wentworth caused a destabilisation of Ireland. Wentworth for over 10 years had managed to keep the lid on the shimmering resentment between the groups of Protestants and Catholics in Ireland. Without him, however, the pressure cooker exploded and the Irish Rebellion caused mass panic in October 1641, exacerbated by propaganda based on the Partington letter. The king remained in Scotland, refusing to return to London to deal with the issue in Ireland, meaning the army remained in Scotland. The debate over who controlled the army reignited. Pym, further annoyed by the king, wrote the Grand Remonstrance, a document with over 150 complaints about the king's reign since 1625. Published in public and distributed, the Remonstrance was to be voted on in Parliament as a whole document, not complaint by complaint. In November 1641, Parliament's loyalty was split between the king and support for increasing the power of Parliament. The Remonstrance passed by 11 votes. This highlights the divide in Parliament since its first sitting in 1640 and the agreements to impeach Wentworth and Laud. Further divide happened over the debates on the control of the army. The militia bill put forward by Parliament placed Parliament in control of an Irish war force. However, moderates in Parliament sided with Charles. Charles blamed Puritans and believed Pym to have been responsible for the bishops' wars. So already angry, when rumours of Pym's plan to impeach the Queen reached Charles, he had had enough. Charles went to Parliament to arrest Pym and his junto. Unsuccessful in this, the King and the royal court left London for Oxford. In June, an offer for settlement was attempted. Parliament's settlement offer, the 19 propositions, included how Parliament should oversee the royal children's education. The King refused, and both King and Parliament readied for war. In August 1642, the King rose his standard in Nottingham, and the Civil War began. Over this lecture, I have spoken about the events that led up to the start of the Civil War. The intention was for you to be able to suggest reasons for the start of the Civil War and reach a judgment on the cause of it in 1642. Knowledge-wise, you need to complete the associated material to be able to explain the backgrounds to Laud and Wentworth and why they were such a huge influence on the king. Skills-wise, you will analyse the associated material around the Irish Rebellion and the impact this has on the start of conflict in 1642. Then finally, behaviourally, begin to interpret the information on the start of conflict and apply to your analysis. Please review this lecture and the associated material to suggest the reasons for the start of the Civil War.